It's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Thanks very much for being with us today. I got to keep this brief because I'm with my friends Ann and Tracey from the 15 Minutes group, and they are judging me on how quickly I can move through this.
45 seconds, Sean.
45, damn it, okay. So as I just said, Ann and Tracey are here. They're from the 50 Minutes group. It's a media training organization. You shouldn't talk this fast, actually, when you're really doing this. I'm going to get notes afterwards, I'm quite sure. And they teach people how to clearly, concisely, and effectively communicate their message across any medium, except for webinars, apparently. I'll get a primer afterwards. Ann and Tracey have prepared and produced hundreds upon hundreds of guests for media appearances, so they really know what it takes to create a commanding presence in any discussion. Distill your message into digestible and engaging headlines and sound bites. No, that's not dumbing it down. And make the most of your media appearance. I can't tell you how thrilled I am. For those of you who were in Miami last year, you probably had a chance to meet Ann. She is delightful. She will be with us again, and Tracey will as well, in San Francisco. But we have the benefit of the next hour of their time just before Ann moves to New York City on Thursday, just after putting a backsplash in her home after, how many years was it?
18.
18 years without a backsplash. This poor lady is now leaving her dream backsplash to go off to New York City. So for those of you from New York, please be nice to her and welcome her, and don't show her your kitchen. All right, so over the next hour, what we're going to cover is what reporters really want out of an interview, how to anticipate likely questions, so what are they going to actually ask you and what can you say, how to craft and stick to clear key messages, unlike what I just did, techniques to stay in control of an interview, and body language and vocal techniques to improve your confidence, which Ann had me doing out in the hallway before going up on stage last year, which was awesome. It totally works. Okay, a couple of quick logistical items before we get started. We're going to be taking questions throughout the presentation. For those of you who've been with us before, you know this. You're going to go into the lower left-hand corner of your screen and type your questions in there. Tristan and I are in the room. We'll be looking at them, and we'll be posing them to Tracey and Ann across the course of the hour. You can also get in touch with us via Twitter. The lovely Richard is upstairs. He's live tweeting this thing, but if you have to send us questions across Twitter, you can do so. That's hashtag ComNetLive, ComNetLive. I'm keeping an eye on those. And we're always delighted to hear what you guys take away from this in the comments that you share. So we'll be looking for it there. And then, of course, this webinar, as we do with all of them, will be posted up on live on comnetwork.org for free replays. It'll also be up on our brand new YouTube channel. Yebby made us a YouTube channel a couple weeks back, and it's awesome. So you can find it there. All right, I got to stop because I went over my 45 seconds by a lot. All right, I feel like the music from the Oscars is playing now. Thanks for joining us. Ann and Tracey, please take it away. Stop me from talking.
Sean is very good, and I like the speed. It keeps up the energy, right? It does. Better than a nice, slow bedtime story. So this is Ann Dickerson talking, and we'll try to ID ourselves. We're so vain, we thought we were going to be on camera, so we thought you'd be able to tell the difference for our voices, but you'll very quickly be able to tell which one's me and which one is Tracey. I have been doing media prep for people for about 15 years. Last week I worked with somebody who went on the Today Show, a former ambassador on Friday night doing Chris Hayes on MSNBC, and we worked with a whole team, a whole newsroom out in Roslyn. Was that just yesterday? Yeah. That was yesterday. So we have kind of developed a system that we think helps people think through what they need before they walk out to talk to the media. And the reason we have some special sauce is because we are both TV producers, and Tracey's also a radio producer. So we know, as people who have interviewed hundreds of people, what we're looking for, what the soundbite looks like, what it smells like, the structure of it. And so we're going to share with you our little behind the other side of the microphone special sauce. Through some of one of the things that we'll tell you today.
And I'm Tracey, and the way you'll be able to tell us apart is because I have an outrageous Canadian accent. I was born and bred in Montreal, and I studied journalism in Canada, and I worked at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation for years. So I've worked in television, radio, and online news, and I currently produce a podcast. So that's how you'll be able to tell. As soon as I say out and about, everybody will know who it is.
Sorry about the Stanley Cup.
Not sorry.
I'm not sorry.
Sorry.
Oh.
Right, I can say it right.
So let's start off with the basics. Starting off with what reporters really want out of an interview. So if you get a media request, then what you need to know is you want to know what they're looking for, what's going to make you a good candidate. Because if you're like most people, you want to not only kill it in an interview, but you want to be invited back. So first off, you have to prepare yourself with the types and realize the different types of media that are out there. If you get invited to do an interview with the New York Times versus, say, Breitbart, then you're going to have a different type of interview. If it's BuzzFeed versus the Wall Street Journal, you're going to get a different type of tone from the reporter, and they're looking for different things. So that's just something to keep in mind. If it's a television interview, is it live or is it pre-taped? If it's radio, it's going to be a shorter, tighter interview than if you're invited to speak on a podcast where you get to expand a little bit on your answers. For a television or even print, you might be invited to speak regarding a feature versus breaking news. And again, keep these things in mind when you are accepting to do an interview, because that is going to affect your messaging. So some of the things that reporters like. A reporter wants to teach its audience something. So what they want is they want some piece of information, some news that's forward-looking. These are things that will help inform the reporter's audience on how to speak better about a topic because they've read a story of his or hers, or because they've heard the interview on TV. So something that says, oh, I know what to expect. I heard an expert speak on this, or I heard someone speak about their organization, and now I know what's happening next. So it's not a backwards-looking type thing. Reporters always like a point or a fact that's counterintuitive, something that surprises the audience, to say, actually, you might not really realize it, but when you think of recycling plastic, it could actually be a bad thing depending on where you live. And so if you make a statement like that, well, then you've got your audience by the shirt collar, because they're thinking, what are you going to say next? You've just said something that's so counterintuitive that I want to hear what points you have to make next, because you've said something counterintuitive. Obviously, being short, concise, and punchy is always a good thing. You do that by knowing what your topic is, speaking about it with a sense of urgency, the way you would if you were speaking to someone with whom you were breaking news. If you came home one day and told somebody an accident you had just seen out on the street, you wouldn't start with a long, drawn-out story. You'd say, there was an accident on the corner. I saw a white car and a black car, and they smashed into each other, and nobody is hurt, but you should have seen the mess that it made, or something like that. Those are all really short, concise sentences, and that's what you want to do. The next point that we have on the board is telling stories. Never, ever be afraid to make the information that you have to share more personal and more poignant by telling a personal story. Something that resonates with you will resonate with your audience. And that could be an anecdote. It could be something that illustrates why you're passionate about the subject that you've come forward to speak about. Anything that can resonate better. Again, that is something we do in our personal lives. You tell a story about how something affects you, and it just drives your point home in a more personal way and makes it connect with the listener. And the last thing is to use facts, because if you're going to come forward with a story to tell and you want to engage your audience and maybe even convert them to your way of thinking, what you're going to want to do is use facts. The trick is to prepare them in advance, something that's going to hit home with them, something that's going to illustrate the points that you want to share, but you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to present so many facts and numbers and statistics that they get lost in the weeds. So you want to drive something home. You want to offer perspective too. So if you're going to mention a number and say that, 75,000 households in the state of New York have this problem, we're going to need to know what percentage of households that is in New York. Is that a lot? Is that a little bit? We need to know. That's why you often hear people referring to the state of Rhode Island. That's double the size, or football fields. Everybody likes mentioning football fields. That's 8 football fields. So what you want to do is you want to come armed with your facts, and you want to be ready to offer some kind of perspective as to why your facts are important and why they illustrate what they illustrate.
So that list, many of you are going to be really familiar with, because one of the great things that ComNet does is kind of delve into the way that those pieces that we think of as kind of core media things are how you communicate on all sorts of topics, in your board reports, in your press releases, and all those things. We're just trying to narrow it down for you for what the media particularly grabs a hold of. They're not going to take your board report and say, wow, page 45, that's really what I want to read. So you're in the business of kind of pulling it from it, what is counterintuitive, what are the cool contextual facts, what are those, that's the food that you're going to feed media. You guys are already doing this as a matter of how you communicate. We're just highlighting the ones that are particularly media friendly. The other thing you all should know is media likes conflict. So, that is something that is professionals in nonprofit world you don't get into, but one of the questions that often comes up is whose fault is it, right? And so being prepared with that is something that we're going to put on the list a little bit later. All right, so now we're up to the likely questions. I think that the easiest way for you to do this for all of you on the call is to do it with a colleague. It's really hard to think through what are you going to be asked by the media just abstractly. So I like to sit down with somebody either on my team, on my communications team, for you all, or just even a colleague or a friend, and say, if I was sat next to you at a dinner party and I told you I was running an organization that teaches homeless people how to macrame, right? What would you want to know? You want to know, well, why the heck do you do that? And why is that important? And what does that mean for, their progress? And how can I get involved? Basic dinner party questions are kind of where you want to start from in terms of media. We call them the kind of big softball ones. Those are the ones that often people have the hardest time with, because you can answer, a lot of times people can answer the really specific question about how many people do you serve, or what's the range of your reach in a thing or two. But you don't think to yourself, like, what is the very loose question? On that topic, before I get to the next slide, I will tell you a little story from a long time ago at UNICEF. When Carol Bellamy was running UNICEF, she had done a long interview with I think it was Newsweek, it might have been Time Magazine. Anyway, she answered every question, hit them totally out of the ballpark, how many child soldiers are being saved here, what maternal mortality in different countries. And at the very end, the reporter said to her, who is the UNICEF child? And it was a huge stumper because it was such a big softball question. So the very first thing you kind of have to grab your hands around is if somebody just asks you the loosest softball question, who do you help? Why do you do this? Why does it matter? Do you have an answer? Are you sort of ready with the answer? Most of us are pretty good when we get in the combative situation, because then we can say, when we get pushed up against the wall, we'll say, well, if you don't do this, if you don't help mothers who are coming in to the hospital, then that, their baby suffers. Like, okay, it's really obvious, but the big loose ones you don't know. So that's the first thing I want to throw up on the likely questions. Now, nitty-gritty is our next slide here. The things you want to kind of walk yourself through, and this first one's really on to kind of talk people off the wall who are like, I don't have time to get ready for this event. Well, since Tracey and I are TV producers, we can tell you a typical TV interview, a live talkback TV interview, is somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes. If you don't have 3 or 4 minutes worth of stuff to say, then it is tough. But if you break that down further and you think the questions are usually 9 to 12 seconds, or roughly, your answer should roughly be between 30 and 45 seconds. So in a 3 to 4 minute live cable TV hit, doing the math, you can get asked anywhere between 3 and 4 questions. That's not very much. So you don't need that much content. So the first thing to ask yourself is, how much stuff do I need, right? Now, podcast is a whole different ballpark, and we would definitely say that if you're doing a 20-minute podcast, you need more than 3 or 4 things to say. But what you're going to do is then you're going to layer on, you're going to take the 3 or 4 things you really want to say, and you're going to, almost like a slinky, you're going to expand it. You're going to add in stories, and you're going to add in facts, and you're going to add in examples. So you actually will have more material. It's just that the super short format won't let you do it. Okay, question number 2 is, what's the angle? Why is the media calling me? What perspective do I have here? Because that is the piece that you really want to offer up. You're not helping yourself or them if you try to be a spokesperson for something else. So if you're calling me because I'm on the ground with homeless people in downtown DC, that's what I want to speak to. So that's my angle. My angle is speaking from that perspective. And don't maybe swim into other worlds or policies, or even if they want to ask you a question that's out of that realm, we have some tools for steering it back. If they want to ask you what's happening at the Texas border, you want to come back, most people, you want to come back to what you know and not try to weigh in on that necessarily if you're not that expert. Next question, who else is on with you as a guest? This is very important for panels because knowing what your role, there's nothing more boring than a panel, and we think of media as panels as well, if everybody on the panel has the same point of view, because then there's kind of nothing to talk about. So even if you all have the same point of view, it's worth figuring out, like, what is my role? What role am I playing here? I'm going to play the role of the grumpy media trainer who thinks that I'm cynical about media. Tracey will play the role of pro-journalism. And once we decide what our role is, then it helps us craft, like, how we're going to speak about it. So asking that in advance, and this is where a good communications team can do the sleuthing, or if it's you who are out there, then you need to find out. Next question to ask yourself, what is the location? This one is, we work with some military people, and I love it. They call this situational awareness. Right? What does the room look like? How close am I sitting to the other person? Am I sitting too close? Am I up on a stool? Am I in a big plushy chair? Are there lights on me? Are there not? Is the background black? Because if the background's black, I might not want to wear black because then I'm like a mime in a box. So you want to ask all these questions about the location because it makes a difference at how you sit. The number one thing I can say in terms of people dealing with location is we see a lot of bad behavior with mics. Right? So if you're sat at a panel and the mic is too far away from you, you all can't see me, but if I lean forward to talk to the mic, we call that eating the mic, right? And you just look like you're trying to like lick an ice cream cone or something. So part of that situational awareness is like, where's the mic? Can I pull it closer to me? Can it sit? Can I stay sitting up? Or each time, do I have to lean over? And if I lean over, am I wearing a low-cut shirt? There are all these many questions as far as the producer is concerned. Last things on the list, news check. You will be asked about the news of the day. Again, if it's not on your topic, we have some tools to steer you back, but you shouldn't be unprepared for somebody to say, President Trump tweeted today that homeless people are terrible, and if that's your topic, you've got to answer to it, right? Be ready if it's currently on the front page of the news. Next point, live versus pre-taped. Live is like a regular conversation. You can misspeak, you can restart. People get nervous about live because they think it's live, but you actually have some room to run. Pre-tape means you need to deliver something nice and packaged and tidy, and that creates some advanced work in your head so that you can deliver what we think of as the soundbite, which for network TV now is around 9 or 10 seconds, which sounds shockingly short, but you can say something in 9 or 10 seconds. Radio versus podcast. Same difference. Live radio means that you've got some give and take with the host. You might be interrupted. You might do some back and forth. Podcast means that actually you can have some room to run. We never tell anyone to monologue, but you can tell more stories. People are expecting it with the podcast. Ask one of the ways to know what kind of questions you're going to be asked is this a feature that's going to sit in the can for, that dated me right there, sitting in the can. That's old TV news. We got it in the can. Put it on the shelf. Is it going to sit, or is this going to go out today? And that dictates also how you approach your topic. Last one on the list, background versus on the record. This is just something we always try to clarify with people. Background, and we have other journalists in the room. Sean can speak up. Background interviews are great. It's a way for you to help shape the story. We call it paying into the karma kitty, because if you help a reporter by talking on background and giving a lot of information, you've basically created a relationship that then you can use, that then might help you at some point when you have a different story you want to tell. You've already created that relationship. On the record fully just means you're going to be, you're going to be named. Where it's gotten a little weird is here in DC, people playing in the middle land, which gets conflated between what some people call off the record and some people call not for attribution. And that's when you see in the paper a senior White House advisor, because they don't want their name on it, but we can narrow it down. I wouldn't play in that middle land unless you have some kind of agenda where you're trying to assassinate, somebody at a rival organization and you have something negative to put out. Most of the time you're going to be on background or on the record. Okay.
Right, but probably worth flagging. So background means when you tell somebody something, they can use it, right? So if you're saying it's off the record, it's guidance, but not available for them to report with any kind of attribution.
Right.
It's like they never heard it, but it's basically telling them, it's like putting them in a Google map. You're in New York City. You haven't told them the block or anything else. They've got to figure all that out for themselves, right?
Right, that's exactly right. So thank you, Sean, for clarifying. Off the record can be useful if you want someone to go and corroborate somewhere else. So I'm telling you this off the record, they would have to go find another source to confirm it. So whereas background, right, none of it is used. All useful, but for different purposes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, you ready, Tracey?
No, you're the senior.
Oh, I'm still going. Sorry, technical difficulties here. Okay. Thank you, Tristan. All right, so crafting these messages. Here's a couple of things you can do. First of all, you want to come up with 3 or 4 main takeaways, what we kind of think of as main messages, right? So I love the guy with the bullhorn. I love it. He's totally shouting. Here's one way that we practice coming up with that main, am I too faint? Coming up with a main message is when you're talking to somebody about what you do, have them say to you, so what? And you say, well, but if we don't help homeless people, then, who are we as humans? And they say, well, so what? You say, well, if we don't do that, then we X, Y, Z. And they say, so what? If you keep pushing in on that, you can come down to kind of what you think of as are your main messages. Those are kind of goalposts, sort of guideposts that you're reaching for. And you want to be sure and try to get out when you're doing a media training. I will pause here briefly and say, some people think you develop talking points and you say them no matter what. We actually don't think that's a really good strategy. We think it's kind of transparent and super annoying to the listener. So you come up with your main messages, and then you want to come up with ways to gracefully get to them. Because if Sean asks me if the sky is blue, and I say, well, Sean, let me tell you about the green grass. Everybody rolls their eyes, and it's incredibly annoying. So you don't want to do that. You want to actually respond to the questions as you can and work in some of your main messages. The other thing to develop are these facts and examples, which Tracey mentioned. You want to craft them and create them so that they're interesting. I can talk about thousands of refugees, and that makes no sense to me. But if I tell you it's the same number of people who filled the stadium here at what do we call it now? Not the Verizon Center. Capital One Arena. Right? Then I have a visual of how many refugees we're talking about. So every time you craft a fact or example, if you can get visual, which sounds strange for TV and radio, but we really like it because it's a way that our human brains, can visualize that information. And the last thing here is jargon, just being super careful that in our world, we often talk about things like, we just watched an interview on NPR where she talked about IDP camps, right? I might know what those are, you might know what those are, but many people don't. So you just try to put it in the plainest English that you possibly can. If you screw up and you say IDP, you say, what I mean by that is camps for people who've had to leave their homes, right? I wouldn't even define it. There's no reason to actually define, just get it in plain English as though you're sitting next to your grandmother at Thanksgiving and you said that and she says, what? And you say, well, people who are fleeing violence, people who are fleeing a war, these camps where they live. So it just helps you become more accessible if you translate the jargon. All right, we're going to do questions.
I think it's time for questions now.
All right, Stefan has one and Jess has one, so let's get to them. I'll lean forward into the microphone, try not to eat it. All right, Stefan asks, when does the story pack most punch? At the top, to wrap up and drive home a point, sandwiched in between some facts and forward-looking stuff, any of the above? So I guess, where does that fit?
Okay, so I say it's a sandwich. The best thing you can do is what we call bookending, which is a technique we're going to get to, which is come out with a punch. You say, okay, Tracey and I have been playing around with this story that cats are smarter than dogs. Right, this is our fake made-up story because we can't get into your, areas where
I do disagree.
It's controversial. It's controversial. So if I was giving an interview, I want to come out right out and say, look, you might get counterintuitive. You might be surprised about this, but cats are really smarter than dogs. Filling in the middle with some facts and examples, 7 out of 10 cats could find a hidden object. Only 3 out of 10 dogs could. And in fact, as soon as the dog found their hidden object, they sat down and chewed it. So I would say that in the middle, and I would wrap, and I'd say, so that's why cats are smarter than dogs. So I would restate my headline, my open statement, at the end with a kind of bookend, and it has more punch that way. I find it almost always has more punch that way than it does with a lead up. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jess asks, can you give an example of getting visual with information or facts?
I'm going to go visual.
Well, I think, you had a good example there when you talked about how many, again, the perspective. if it's X number of children, could they fill a stadium? Could they, or if it's a certain percentage of school children are not eating lunch, how many, what does that translate into? So, or it's something, what's another way of getting visual?
Well, I think the other way that we talk about this is the more description you have on it. So if I were to tell you people were streaming the streets of Washington, D.C., that's fine. But if I say people dressed in burlap bags with pitchforks and hammers with red paint, every detail that I can get that's visual pulls, this is what you often see in the lead of a story in the New York Times. They'll say, the pile of steaming trash in Haiti is about to topple over on the sidewalk where the young woman is nursing her baby. I'm getting super dramatic here, but it's always it's in the detail. Some people call it the kind of the color. And the more color you can put in, if I tell you there's a kid's birthday party and it blew up, that's fine. But if I say the kid's birthday party who was an 8-year-old with a chocolate cake, and for his birthday he wished for his sister to be cured of cancer, and then the house blew up, now I'm way more interested, right? It's a boy. I sound really dramatic today. I'm not. I'm normally this dramatic. So I think visual, especially. This is. Tracey will nod at me. Radio and podcast, because there are no pictures, right. You have to paint the story for them. TV will roll B-roll all day long. It's not that TV doesn't like a visual metaphor or description, especially descriptions of things that TV cameras can't see. So that's where it's crucial. We're seeing that a lot at the border right now, right? Cameras are not going into those facilities, so you're relying on people being interviewed to say, here's what I saw, here's what it looks like.
And it's not easy. That's the important thing that people have to remember is it's not easy to do if you don't think about it in advance. Mm-hmm. So if you prepare it, this is what makes good journalists today, but especially, a couple of decades ago in radio and stuff when there were no images and the radio reporters had to paint a scene with words. This is what you'd have to do now. So if you came forward with a message from your organization and you want to come forward and say, families are in despair because of what they're being put through, ask yourself the question, how do I know that these families are in despair? Were they crying to you on the phone? Did you see it in their eyes? Did you see how clenched somebody's fist was around their child's hand, et cetera? Something that gives you the clue that you're making a descriptive statement will help describe the situation to us so that we feel the same way you feel based on what you saw, because now we've seen it too, thanks to an accurate description. But again, the trick is to prepare it, because if you get onto a news set, an interview set, and you haven't prepared that, it's kind of hard. So just think about your examples ahead of time.
So this is a good question from Jay. Can I answer this one, guys?
Yeah.
Beyond using acronyms like IDP. So this is where ComNet has done I think you all have done some really interesting thinking about how do we talk about vulnerable groups and other groups that are not, media and TV, Tracey and I are cynical, we tend to reach for the biggest weapon, which is, the crying child, the devastation, all that. And I think it's tricky, right? Because there's fatigue, there's all kinds of things happening. So Jay, this is a good question. I would say the pitfalls to avoid are really impersonal things like service. I hear that a lot. I hear, we provide a lot of services to people. I want you give them health care. You check their eyes. You make sure their babies have diapers. Like services is just one of those like cold words. Mm-hmm. Yeah, clinical words. So services I hear. Capacity is another one that I don't like. Yeah. Right? It's such a great word because it means so much. But you have to say what that means. It's like we have enough doctors and nurses to help the people. Instead of saying this health facility has the capacity to help 100 patients. What is capacity, right? It's health. So it's often kind of drilling down to the kind of what is the English word that may not be perfect. It's a reason we went to capacity when we work in this business because it is more accurate. But for media, weirdly, you need to touch heart, not accuracy. So heart is how many doctors and nurses can help people, not what is the capacity of this hospital.
And a litmus test for that would be if you were saying that to a smart 14-year-old, how would they react? If you said, well, Billy, we have the capacity to do this, we're offering services. Poor Billy would be lost thinking, I don't get it. I thought you said these people are living in camps. You say, yeah. How would you describe it to that person to drive the point home? Or what are some examples? What are some,
This is a good one for you, Tracey, from Maria Daniels. So Tracey has been a booker and a producer for many years. So if someone messes up with you, how do you make it up?
Flowers, chocolates. So yeah.
Never hurts.
So, but you know what? It's an excellent question because you have obviously tapped into the sensitivities that bookers and producers have because they're so overworked / busy / lazy that they need the easiest route to the next good interview. And if you've been on the show before, you're always going to be a really solid backup plan for them. And so if you've burned them once or you've either messed up scheduling wise where you couldn't show up and had to kind of leave them in the lurch, or if you've made it onto air and they thought you were going to be a better performer than you ended up being, I like that you're asking the question because it means that you know how sensitive they are to that. So the answer to how to win yourself over, I'm going to assume for this case that we're talking about a past performance that was flubbed, that they thought you were going to be something when you got on the air and then you weren't when they got there. I would write a personalized note talking about the work that you've done since then and kind of maybe even a proof. If you say, oh, I got some really good feedback on this panel discussion that I did not too long ago, you might want to take a peek at it. Something that's really, really easy for them to do, provide the link, provide any info that they need. Talk about some of the feedback you've gotten on some of your current interviews where you say, a lot of people on Twitter liked the phrase I used or anything that kind of beefs up your credibility once again. But as I say, I just think it's great that you're asking the question because that is a pedal. You have to pedal extra hard.
All right, I think we got to leave it there. We have a few more questions. I promise, Shireen and Jay, you got a couple more in here. We will get to them, but we're going to get back to this just to be mindful of everybody's time. So why don't we move on and start talking about techniques to stay in control of an interview.
Yes, so the important part to remember is that experts prepare memorable content, and you should too. So the goal here in this section of the talk is to talk about not straying from your key messages. So let's take a look at some of the techniques. These are things that will allow you to stand your ground and give solid footing to your messages despite the types of questions, the types of angles that might potentially knock you off your footing. So the first technique this is a really important one. It's called ABC. What you want to do is, if this is a question that you're either not comfortable answering or you simply don't know the answer, what you want to do is you want to, A, acknowledge the question. So Anne gave the example before of someone asking about the blue sky, and if you don't want to answer that question, you turn around and you say, well, let's talk about the green grass. That's not being respectful to the interviewer because that's not what they asked you. So unlike the traditional pivot that you've all heard about, this is acknowledging the fact that the question was actually asked. So that's when you say, that's a very, I'm glad you brought that up because that issue has been getting a lot of attention on Twitter. So you haven't said whether you agree, whether you disagree. You're not arguing for or against. What you're doing is you're saying that the controversial point that the interviewer is bringing up, although you're not going to comment on it, it was a valid question to ask you about it. And then the B in ABC is to now bridge to your content. So it's either content or you're correcting their content. That's what the C stands for. So, example, if someone says, isn't it true though that President Trump says that a lot of these people coming across the borders are criminals? Listen, that's not your debate to get into or I'm going to assume that our audience doesn't want to debate that point. If you're working with an organization that helps migrant people, you're going to want to acknowledge the fact that the question was asked and say, that is a message that's being heard loud and clear, especially when the President of the United States shares it. But what I see on the ground is families. And those families, and then you move into the point. And it's one of the points that you've prepped earlier, one of the takeaways that we talked about. So you're acknowledging that the question was asked, but you're not doing a simple pivot, you're beefing that up a little bit. A second technique used to stay in control of the message that you've come to share is signposting. Signposting is used when sometimes you have long, complex ideas to share, or an idea that has several aspects to it. And what you do when you signpost is you say, well, Bill, there are 3 components that, to keep in mind if this bill is to pass. There's the family part of it, there's the I don't know, anyway, so you divide it into 3 sections. What you're doing is, can't think of 3, but the truth is that what you're saying is when you're signposting, you're preparing the audience for that. So you'll say, you'll give those examples ahead of time, and then mentally the listener knows that although this is a little bit of a long answer, you've promised that it would be divided into X numbers of areas. So that's signposting. That's what you're doing is you're prepping your audience. And truth be told, you're prepping yourself because you're saying, what did I just promise? Oh yeah, there were 3 things. So that's kind of a gift you give yourself. Another gift you give yourself is a technique called bookends. Bookends is,
That's the one I hit.
Yeah, the classic, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you just told them. So bookends can be used as a technique coming out of the gate where you say, Nancy, thanks for asking the question. The most important thing for our organization is the children. And then you get into some numbers, you get into some facts, and then you say, and that's why children really are our focus. What you've done is you've told the host of the show that you are finished your answer, and you know what? You've told yourself that you're finished too. And sometimes sometimes you find yourself lost in the weeds of an answer. If you ever find yourself veering off course, you can always just pull out a bookend out of your back pocket and say, and that was the end of my point. And then you put a nice little punchy word at the end of it, and that's, as I say, a gift about you and the
that one sometimes.
All the time.
I mean, just when you're headed down a pathway, just restate your start.
Exactly.
As a way to get out.
Yeah. We talked about this before, comparison to make your facts resonate. The minute you give perspective, that's the moment that people get a better idea of why you're saying what you're saying. Repetition to drive a point home is great. Repetition, and Anne and I were talking about this, if you have a dramatic number to share with the audience, never hesitate to stop yourself mid-sentence and say, this is affecting 3 out of every 4 children. And stop, pause, and say, Bill, that's 3 out of every 4 children are affected by this. Never hesitate to, if you have a nice, strong number that you want to, if it were in print, you would be bolding it and underlining it or putting it in all caps. That's a strong way to do it. Another time that repetition is used is in a poetic way, where you say, these children have never seen electricity coming from a wall or water coming from a tap. It's kind of a poetic way to drive the same type of point home that really illustrates something in a poetic way. Here's the next one on the list here on the screen, narrowing, is a super important technique to have in your back pocket. It's used in 2 different scenarios. Sometimes reporters will ask you what we call a sandwich question. That's when reporters don't really know what they want to ask, so they throw a whole bunch of questions at you at once saying, well, when is this bill going to go into effect? And if it does, how many children would actually benefit from it? And do people support the idea that this is going to be in every classroom in the United States? Well, guess what? Those are 3 completely different questions, and they didn't do their job by asking a concise question out of the gate. So what you have to do is, this is the easy way out. This is the great news for you, is that you just pluck one of them. You pluck your favorite question out of those 3 disparate questions and answer one of them. If the other 2 were important enough to be asked, then the reporter will come back to it, and that's the reporter's job. The other time that the narrowing technique is used is when somebody asks you a question to which there are multiple answers, and you don't know how to convey the fact that, well, you could go on for hours if you had to. So if someone says, there are 34 states who have this program now in place, and how's it working out for those states? Well, you're not going to go into every single state. So what you're going to say is, because you will have prepared this ahead of time, you'll say, well, let's just take New York and California, for example. In both of those states, this bill has received support, or whatever you want to get into. So that's the second way of using the narrowing technique, is when you could go on forever, but you acknowledge that there's a wider range of answers, but that you're choosing to only expand on X number of them. You can choose 1, 2, 3, whatever works best. And the last one on the list is my personal favorite, because it too, not unlike the bookends, can get you out of a hole, get yourself out of a hole. Rhetorical is the term that we use when we urge you to ask yourself a question. Again, if you're getting lost, or if you're seeking clarity at any given moment, you can feel yourself going down into a story and talking about, what kind of parents you spoke to and the kids, and this is how they reacted. And then you think, oh, well, how does the story end? And so what you do is, out of your back pocket, you say, and so, Jill, why does this matter? This matters because these families have X, Y, Z. Or you can ask yourself.
Ask and answer.
Yeah, ask the question and answer it, So why is this different from the same bill that was passed in 1986? Well, this time, and all of a sudden now everybody's paying attention, and that's just a really punchy way to bring yourself back into control, and it also serves as a nice strong ending. And while we're on the topic of strong endings, never hesitate to punch your last word in any, once your thought is over, to just let the interviewer know that you're done. So those are all the techniques that we urge people to use to stay in control of your message.
Okay. May I ask our overlords a question here?
Yeah, please.
Do we want to leave?
I think the last one we've been called overlords. Maybe the first one we've been called
Sean
overlords.
and Tristan, the overlords. Do we want to leave 10 minutes at the end? So I'll just time myself.
Oh, our timing? You know what? Let's think we're about 5 or 7 minutes. How about that?
Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll go for 5 or 7. All right. So because Tracey and I are shallow TV people, we have to get to some of these things that you do with how you look and how you sound. So, guys, here's the deal. It's so easy for you. Sean is wearing the worst thing you could possibly wear on TV right now in front of us. And I'm going to describe it for you. It's great for a webinar, though. It's great for a webinar.
Great for a 95-degree day.
Where no one can see him. Sean is wearing a light blue linen shirt. And it's wrinkly. And it's lightweight, and so first of all, the mic would drag it down if you had a mic on it. So if you are on a panel or TV or anything else where anyone is filming you, guys, medium blue shirt is your friend. If you have brown skin, you can wear a lighter or white shirt. Looks totally fine. Obama did it for 8 years with a jacket. One thing about a full white shirt, no matter what your skin color is, TV lights will tend to wash you out because they see the light shirt and it pops all this light on it. So you're usually better off in a kind of medium color. If you're bold, I actually like kind of a bright pink on men. Looks good sometimes too. So
you say medium blue, so to be really clear. That's not this.
Well, no one can see what you're wearing, right? Yeah. So medium blue to me is deeper than a robin's egg color. It's somewhere between blue sky, deep blue sky. What is that? What do you call that? Baby? Not light blue. This is where we need darker than baby. We should have put a slide up. Yeah. We'll add a slide to the end of it.
We'll take a picture of my shirt and put it on the end.
Okay, yeah. Everyone wants to see that. Someone snapshot right now. This is not it. Tristan has a pattern shirt on too. That is also a no-no because I got to look at the pattern. What is on there, Tristan? So it's got starfish and it's got shells and it's got, anyway, the point of what you wear when you're talking about your topic is not to distract anybody. So the moment I'm having a thought about what the little icons are on Tristan's shirt, I'm actually not hearing what he's saying. So that's why you just want to keep it simple and keep it super clean. So guys, plain shirt, whether it's a tie or no tie, that's kind of up to you in terms of style. There are TV shows where you would always wear a tie. Face the Nation is a show which is super formal, and Morning Joe is a little more casual, right? So depending on if you're doing local TV, you'll just know what it is they do. So I always like the look of a jacket and shirt with no tie on, guys. I think that's super sharp.
Buttoned, not buttoned?
So I like when you sit down to unbutton, because if you're buttoned when you're sitting down, it buckles the lapels. So you want those to lay straight. Your biggest trick in your back pocket for anybody doing anything where they're being filmed is to ask somebody near you, do I look okay? We always forget, do I have spinach between my teeth, Tracey? I know it's a webinar, but just to say, do it, because sometimes you're going along, you don't even know, and whoever is working or the camera people, they're busy, and you've got one hair sticking out, and then it lives forever on the web.
Right.
And people say, oh gosh, look at Tristan's tie. It was like moire. So last thing for men, anything tight pattern, any light on dark stripe or light on dark pattern will cause cameras to do what we call moire. They're trying to focus on both the light and then the dark and the light and the dark because they're digital now, because we don't actually have human beings controlling these cameras half the time anymore. Or if they are, they put it on auto. And it creates this little electric sizzle that we call moire. So for guys, you don't want to do that. All right, women, we have so many other more issues for women, but I will stick with the basics. Bright, solid colors always look great when you're giving a speech, you're being photographed. one thing that Tracey and I have had fun at doing is we pulled up an image search of Sheryl Sandberg. If anyone out there can find an image of Sheryl Sandberg wearing a pattern or a stripe, we will pay you what? We'll give a free
drill. Not looking good.
She's always wearing a solid jewel tone color.
Not distracting.
And it's never distracting. It's always a deep color. We say jewel tones, that's turquoise, that's like deep emerald, that's ruby. All those colors would really go on TV. You need a rich color.
When you say TV, this should also apply on like a panel discussion or something.
Panel, anything.
The Queen always wears something really
right, the Queen is a great example now that I think about it. She's always been like solid, right? Not Beyonce, is what you're saying. Right, I think we think of panels now as TV because they're being, I mean, in DC now, all of our clients and friends do panels. They're being recorded with like 3 cameras. It's full on TV, and they're lit. And they live up on the web, and it's just like anything you would see on morning television or anything else. So I think the rules across the board. So women, solid jewel tone colors, bright lipstick always looks good, and big chunky necklaces. Those are the 3 things. I think for panels, one of your safest uniforms for women are black pants and a bright shirt. That will get you a long way, because one of the things about panels is people tend to be raised up. And so skirts sometimes get problematic depending on what length you like to wear. All right, where to look. This one is pretty easy, except for people mess it up all the time because there's an easy rule. If you're in the room with a human, you look at the human. If you're not in the room with a human or the human you're talking to, you look straight at the camera. Almost never do you look straight at the camera if you're with other humans, because that's a convention that the actual reporter uses. They look straight in the camera and they give their report, and then they look to you to ask the question. And when you do that, you look like you're trying to be somewhere else. Golden rules on looking around, and I think this is definitely true for panels. We see some very bad panel behavior where people are looking all over the place, right? You either look at the person who's talking or you look at the audience. If you're looking down or looking up or side or left or whatever, you look distracted, and you just don't look like you're involved in the conversation, even if you're not talking. And I think that's a big no-no in terms of like being polite. All right, how to sit. Straight up. So this is one where a little bit of slump. You're failing right now, Tristan. I just want to tell everyone in the audience that he's kicked back. They had no idea. No, I called you overlords. Overlords. TV exaggerates bad posture. So you have to do exactly what your mother told you, which is to pull your shoulders back, sit really square. We usually tell people if your back, like Tristan is on the back of the chair, you're too far back. It looks too relaxed. It looks, basically, I'm assuming all of you all who are out there, or the person you're prepping, you are passionate about whatever topic you're talking about. And so to sit back conveys body language that says, I don't really care that much about the homeless people, right? But if I'm forward, I'm passionate about it, and I want to make a fix, I want to make a change, I want to convince you of something, I want to tell you a story. So when you're sitting, you want to be straight up and down or forward, and shoulders back. The only other thing to mention there is that she's twisting back and forth, so I was going to call that out, but no one can see that, is the pivot in a swivel chair. So panels, this is going away a little bit because people have gotten wise, that you can't have a big fluffy chair or a chair that moves because, it looks fidgety. All right, the last thing on my list are the 5 Ps. That's about voice modulation. So Tracey's a radio person, and she knows that with a well-timed pause, that's one of the Ps, you can have emphasis, right? So right before you want to say something important, you can add that in. That will cue up everybody that something serious is happening. So that's the first P, is using your pause. The next P is using your pitch. So we can all speak kind of high. I can kind of use my voice to get up in the upper level, or I can go really low if I want. We all have control over that, and the way we use it is how we control how the message comes in. So if I say to Sean, I need you to get bread and milk and eggs at the store, and I don't emphasize any of those, they're all kind of equal. But if I say, I need you to get bread and milk and eggs, and I'm really emphatic about that, and I use my pitch to go down, that's the thing you're going to remember. Okay, pace. Pace is one where you can speed up, and I can say things that aren't as important kind of faster, and then when I really need you to hear what I'm saying, I'm going to slow down a little bit. So that's a great tool if you can control it. Last 2 pieces of this are pronunciation. We said 5, so I got to do 5. I can't do that signpost thing of like, I got 5 things to say, 5. So pronunciation, that is just being clear and articulate. Sometimes that goes hand in hand with pace. If you pick up your pace, the words start to kind of get mushy. And especially if you want to emphasize something, you have to be clear on your pronunciation. Tracey's very good at this. And the last piece is projecting. So even though you've got a microphone on you, or even though you're on a panel and the mic is in front of you, you still want to speak pretty loudly and boldly. If you have a voice tone that's just a little bit down like this, then people are like, what's going on? It's not even that the audio will be low, it's that your tone says something about that you're not passionate. So that projection says, we have to fix this problem. You're kind of a little bit louder, a little bit prouder. That's the 5 Ps, and I'm going to stop there for questions.
I'm going to throw in a question at the start. So this is, a lot of folks will do an interview on television these days. You get put in the closet, right?
Yeah.
And you literally have these like remote cameras, it's a tiny room, and there's a camera, it's robotic.
Yeah.
You're sitting in a high-backed bar stool, right?
Yeah.
And you have a return monitor, which is basically showing you on television as if you're in an old kung fu movie that's been dubbed. What do you do? I mean, I just described that
number
to folks,
one,
but I don't know if most folks don't know what I'm talking
right.
about. But you actually even do that when you're on a Google Hangout, when you're
Yeah.
having a conversation with somebody and you can see yourself.
Right, and we didn't
the temptation is always, oh, hey,
look
my
at yourself.
hair.
Right.
Right.
So never look at yourself, and if you're in that closet with the monitor on, ask to turn the monitor off. None of us can control ourselves. You're like, oh look, my hair's that color. Like you can't distract yourself. So I say ask to turn the monitor off. On Google Hangout, make yourself as small as you possibly can, right? Because it's just too tempting to have your eyes shifting down to that corner of your screen every time it looks shifty. So I mean, that's such a good question. The other issue there is, I think, all alone with that camera, you just have to pretend that the camera is a person. You have to pretend that you're talking to a camera, and it's the weirdest thing you will ever do, probably.
Yeah. How do you practice for that if you don't have a camera sitting in your house?
With a phone, with an iPhone, right? You literally, and put your iPhone on your mantle and talk to it and answer the questions that you've predicted that you'll be asked, and try not to take your eyes off that iPhone, and it's not easy because you want to just look around the room when you're actually answering a question and thinking about it the way we do as humans, where you kind of look off into the distance or you look at different things. You can't do that, and that's the biggest challenge. So that's the other thing that we tell people is to practice, practice, practice. And you feel like an idiot and you're talking to yourself all alone on your iPhone, but it's only when you do it that you realize, wait, that took me a minute and a half to answer that question, or I don't have anything to say.
That's the only way you can get better at it. It's like a callus you have to build. It's not like we have a trick. If we did, I mean, no, we don't. You have to practice that.
No, it's true. My neighbors in my neighborhood see me walking with the dog all the time, practicing right before ComNet, and they think I'm the man who talks to himself, and I probably am, but I'm practicing. Shireen has a question here, right, which is, what do you do if you're stumped? For example, a reporter asks you about a news item that you haven't heard about yet, it's news to you, but you're live or you're on a panel, you got to respond.
Okay, so we use the I don't know, but I do know, or I can't say, but I can say. So this is the technique you use when you get thrown over the boat, you're trying to swim to the island of the thing you do know. So why did Trump do blah, blah, blah? And you say, look, I can't speak to Trump's tweets, but what I can say is if we don't help the homeless people who are in our community, X, Y, Z, you immediately move to what you do know. And that phrase will work for you every time. Like, what is Congress going to pass this law? Look, I can't speak to what Congress is doing. What I can say is that we're spending our time working on X, Y, Z. So that little rhetorical trick will get you a long way. Do you want me to?
I made up an ABC question for the person because it is super important, and that might be the single most important technique that you have to own is how to jump back to your messaging.
So before you give it, so the A is acknowledge, the B is the bridge, and the C is your content. So if that helps you structure it. The bridge might just be a but, or it might be a and. It doesn't. There's not a lot in the bridge necessarily. So. You give me your example. So if I were interviewing you and I said, your organization advocates free lunches in every public school, how will the system ever be able to cover that cost? It's just not realistic. You want me to give an ABC?
Yeah, you would give an ABC
You
to
put
that.
me on the spot here.
No, but you just,
Well, okay. So
that's
that's
also an opportunity for higher ground, by the way.
I think we can all agree. So that's not a technique we taught them. So
Yeah.
well, I will do it though. So a technique when you get the question you don't want to answer is to move to the higher ground. So that question of Tracey, I would say, look, I think we can all agree that kids being at school hungry is not ideal. We need to figure out the right way to do it, and this answer maybe isn't perfect, but I think we can all agree that hungry kids are not good students, and that's not good for America. Like I go for the big old apple pie and flags waving.
And acknowledging it would be acknowledging that the cost would be high.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So the A in the ABC in that example is, yes, you're right, the cost is high, and the payoff is high too because all the children would benefit and that's the generation, et cetera. So you're not saying, what a stupid question, it's not going to cost anything. You're saying, yeah, good point, you're right, we've thought of this, we know this, and here's how I respond to the pushback.
Let's see here. Jay asks, best practices of when to use the principal, the boss, whoever it might be, as a spokesperson versus using your comms director. So when does the comms director get the call from the newspaper reporter or the television show and say, you got somebody to come talk on this, and it's, I'll do it, I'm the comms director, or wait a minute, I got to go get the person from the program staff or the boss. How do you make that decision? How do you make that calculation? If they haven't asked in particular.
If they haven't asked in particular, I would say that deploy your ED judiciously and on high-value targets. So you will very quickly devalue if they're doing kind of low-level media, and they're in charge of some kind of marquee organization. So I would kind of hold your executive director back, your principal back for the special. And most of the time, I think the communications director, because you have the stuff in your head and you're thinking about how you're communicating it. So I think if you can do it, it's only if they say, oh, no, we really want your principal, then okay, fine. But most of the time, I think I would say, I'd love to come on. I mean, never say no to an opportunity. And if you're the quickest one to say yes, then you're not dealing with scheduling and you're not dealing with am I pulling him out of a board meeting to do this? I'll do it. So I would default to the comms director.
You just made a really important point, which is say yes. Right?
Say yes.
That's not for nothing. Like reporters, whether they're a TV booker or whether they're a radio producer or whether they're working on television, they're working on deadlines, right?
Yeah.
And they are literally, there's a Rolodex. And you're in it when you get that call. And if you say no once, twice, 3 times, you're out of it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So the opportunity.
Not unlike dating.
It's been a while for me, but I think that's
our next webinar for 15 minutes. So what we often say is when the request comes in, say yes or say no, or say it's not me, but Olivia over at Pew would be really fantastic.
Right.
Redirect. But you got to give something. If you give nothing, then you don't give the.
But you also don't have to answer the question right then. You can say yes, and I'll call you right back.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go talk to my
or yes, I'll call you
who's going to respond,
exactly.
or I need a minute to put together my answer.
Yeah,
right?
Never feel pressured to answer the questions right then and there, because they'll be happy, even if you say, I'll just call you back in 20 minutes. And then you regroup, and then you're more prepared for that. They actually want you to be prepared. We've run out of time, but these two last questions are similar.
We'll go over for those who will stay with us, because this is going to live on the internet.
Okay.
So before we contact
that's very important, right?
But that is important. Let's see. Shannon said, sorry I hit send before I finished that thought. Looking for special tips on being interviewed by a reporter from an outlet that has leaned negative on your issue in the past. That never happens. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
And the next one is very similar,
so
right?
you're
Negative.
working for, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of.
Well, no, so I'll quickly say,
there's plenty of a certain radio host out there who seems to hate a lot of stuff. Probably your stuff, but you get invited to go on that show.
Right.
What do you do?
Right. So the prep there is incredibly important. Like figuring out where the touch point is, right? Is the issue higher government regulation? Is the issue dissect? You got to do some self-diagnosis, right? Because likely they're not against, say, helping homeless people. What they're negative on is a bloated budget or bureaucracy or whatever. And then I would be armed, ready to preempt those questions. Don't be in the seat and wait for you to be asked that, this is going to cost a lot. I mean, we can't have a budget for Baltimore that's, unbalanced, so that you start with it and you say, look, I know one of the things you're concerned about is the budget, but we know that investing 10 cents in every kid for lunch it gives us $1 worth of graduation rates at the other end or whatever, I would be proactive. I think we in general think of media as people often play it defensively, like, ooh, I might get asked that question. If you can neuter it by
coming. There's a running joke in the nonprofit sector, which is crisis communications is anytime a reporter calls. Right?
That's funny. I like
I'm not
that.
kidding.
I like that. So Shannon, I hope that helps a little bit. I think you want to meet it head on. That would be my advice there. Is anytime you look defensive or like you're avoiding an issue that is a concern, then it's a weaker position than it is to sort of just hug it. Say, yeah, you're absolutely right. Some of these things are expensive, but you know what? We think it's worth it, and here's why. If that's their negativity.
But is there a time to say no? So when you're you have sort of the Ed McMahon role where you're the foil, right? You're there to sit there and laugh.
There are some shows that strategically we actually don't think it's worth doing because they're so negative and they're so unfair that you just end up being kind of red meat fodder for something ugly, and you can't win. And even though it's frustrating, I think that's the one time I think there are a few shows that I would say you walk away, you say no. Also, you're dignifying a show that you really think, there's a few here in D.C. that have gone off the rails. And I think if you put your executive director on one of those shows, you're legitimizing it. And I don't think that's worth doing. That's weird for me to say, but I've gotten to that point recently.
Thankfully, they're few and far between, but the ones that are there are super extreme.
And they live on the web, right? A bad moment on a small show can blow up on Twitter. It happens all the time.
Yeah, and they'll count. Yeah.
Did we get to them all? I feel like we left one hanging. Or did we get to Louise's?
Those last two were the same.
Great. All right. Well, hey, listen, guys. I think on behalf of everybody, we had several hundred people turn up for this thing, so I think that tells you how much interest there's been in this topic. We're excited to see you guys in San Francisco. Thank you very, very, very much. For those of you in New York, please be nice to Ann. She's going to be there after Thursday.
And come to our, what do we have, a
pre-conference workshop in San Francisco.
Pre-conference workshop.
Everybody in San Francisco in a couple of months.
And if you come to our pre-conference workshop, we will actually put you up in front of the microphone and do some, we'll do some.
Oh, we're doing some live fire?
Yeah, we're going to do some live fire.
Okay. All right, well, listen, everybody, have a safe and lovely and hopefully less hot and humid day, and we will be back with you fairly soon. If you're on the West Coast, there's a really cool thing we're doing in San Francisco and LA. There's a Storytelling for Good workshop that'll be happening next week. In Los Angeles, I think on Tuesday, and in San Francisco on Thursday. It's free. You can check it out on comnetwork.org. That's it for us. We'll see you again very, very soon. Thanks so much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand by.